This episode is brought to you by AppWork. Much more than maintenance, AppWork is advanced business intelligence. You can streamline your maintenance workflows and keep an eye on the leaderboard as service team members enjoy the gamification of maintenance. If that sounds interesting, visit appworkco.com. That's appworkco.com and transform your productivity today. Welcome to another collective conversation. I am your host, Mike Brewer, and today I have the privilege of speaking with an amazing human, Lia Nichole Smith. Lia serves as the Senior Vice President of Education and Performance for Apartment Ratings and Satisfacts Research. Lia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I can't believe we're finally able to make this happen.
It's been, we were speaking before we hit the record button. It's been a very long time coming. We talked about the idea that we've kind of been acquainted for a long bit of time, finally met last year, but here we are. Finally, got this one going. How have you been?
I'm hanging in there, and it's a busy time for our industry, so it's been a lot of playing catch up, but then trying to stay a couple of steps ahead of what's going to happen next, right? So it's an exciting time.
Oh, I could not agree more. I think for two reasons, if you don't mind me sharing. I know you recently relocated, and that's exciting. And to your point about the industry, there is so much happening in the industry. It just blows my mind. Every time I wake up in the morning and I look at LinkedIn, I'm like, what? Like, where did that come from? So
Yeah, and it's one of those where you want to kind of take a beat, sit with what kind of make some strategies based on all of the stuff that has been coming in, and then just when you think you have the answers to the test, boom, renters have changed the game all over again.
that is so true. And what an incredible segue. I love the way you teed that up for me, because the big reason we are visiting today and we're recording this episode is because do you say biennally, but you gotta help me pronounce that word. Online Renter Study just came out recently. That's what we're here to talk about.
Yes, the biennial. I've had to
Biennial.
learn I've had to learn the difference between biennial and biannual. And
Yes.
we get it switched around all the time around here.
Well,
Yes.
I just embarrassed myself by butchering that word, so thank you for rescuing me. Um, that's awesome. Well, I want to start this conversation. This has been around by Italy for a while now. If you could unpack the timeline for us, I just think our viewers and our listeners would be interested in understanding the origin story and maybe kind of over the years how this has come to be for this year.
Yeah, I love this study so much. It started in 2011, and I actually started with Satisfacts in the same year. The
Mm,
year I started, about 3 months before I started, the survey was conducted, the write up happened, it was sent out. So I kind of came into it as a learner, learning about renters and learning about the data and what they had to say. And I mean, that study in 2011, our industry had never seen anything like it, because if you think about 2011, not a whole lot of research was being done online prior to contacting a community. You had some people that were kind of getting into it, but a lot of people would go to the grocery store and get those apartment books. Remember those? I know I'm totally dating myself right now, but that's how a lot of people shopped, right? Like they got those apartment books, or they spent an entire Saturday just kind of going around the neighborhood and looking at places. And Doug Miller, I have to give him full credit, so kind of had the forethought of saying, I do believe renters are moving in this direction, because as consumers, we started doing more stuff online because technology allowed us to do it. And right, technology finally, made it sort of, you could be on the internet without having to be at work. I remember only time I could get on the internet was, at the job or whatnot. And so technology started to allow us different avenues to, you know, just change the way we lived. So in 2011, the study was conducted, major write up, a lot of buzz in the industry. And at the time, they kind of thought, okay, yeah, we know what we're doing. We're doing pretty good. We're having a, we got a good direction going. So the data sat for a few years. In 2014, we decided to revisit the study. Now, this is where the biennial part comes in. We decided to revisit it. It's like 3 years later. Let's just kind of check in with renters. If you look at the data tables in the study between 2011 and 2015, because that's when the study was released, night and day difference. I mean, just the use of technology, the behavior patterns, what renters wanted. It was like, stop the presses, re-strategize, because these renters have really like gone from 0 to 100 in, a very short period of time. So we decided, let's learn from our past mistakes. Maybe we don't need to wait 4 years to do the survey again. So that's where the biennial part came into play. We started doing it every odd year. So, we didn't want to be blindsided. We didn't want to point the industry in the wrong direction. So starting 2015 is the biennial part. But it's just amazing. Like, even if you look at the data table from 2011 to 2023, the most recent year, I mean, they're like two different sides of a coin, when you're looking at renters. Even with the different age ranges that are coming in, the markets have, really shifted. And if anyone, I don't know how many of your followers, listeners have been around that long, but I you know it without the data telling you, right? This is a different world than in 2011, but it's always great to have that quantitative proof
That's
that,
right.
that tells you, okay, we're on the right track, or hey, here's a couple of, I call them whispers. When you start to see little things change in the data,
Yes.
for example, in 2017, we saw whispers of social media. Never saw that before.
Mhm.
Started seeing little whispers of like it becoming more important, people paying more attention, becoming more engaged. And so with that data, we actually did a 2018 social media study, complete, just separate study on social media to again give the industry as much information to work with as they were creating their strategies and things like that. So there's a lot of I don't know how to put it. I don't want to keep using the word whispers, but you got to pay attention to the whispers, right? You got to pay attention to that little, that little whisper on your shoulder saying, "Hey, this stuff's going to be important. Do something about it now before it becomes important." So I love this study. I anticipate it every time we get ready to roll it out. I as soon as the results come back from our analysts, I probably spend a good maybe 72 hours straight just looking at the data. I don't make any, assumptions. I just look at it,
Sure.
and then the stories start to form around, like the numbers change to letters in my mind. It's a weird Rain Man kind of thing, but the numbers start to turn to letters, and the letters start to form sentences, and the sentences start to form the whole narrative around, different topics that are in the survey.
I, thank you for unpacking that timeline, and I think you're absolutely right as it relates to the frequency of the report. I mean, the accelerated pace of change sort of predicated on technology making its way into the world, but then into the multifamily space. I think it lagged a little bit, but it poured fire on like a little spark, and now it's just everything changes. It seems like daily we have changes happening. So in that context, can you talk about the methodology, that maybe just high level methodology that you use to collect this information?
Yeah, so in the past, we would invite management companies to allow us to contact their residents, via email to have them take the survey, which is something we continue to do. In the last two rounds of the study, we've added an open URL on apartment ratings. So any visitor who goes to the site, they get that little pop up. We love your opinion. We love your feedback, and they
Oh,
can take the survey. So what's been really interesting the last couple of rounds is that when we get the data, we get comparative data sets. We get data sets from existing residents. We know they're there because property management companies. And then we get a second data set from visitors to apartment ratings.
so like a prospect coming in that might visit your site, they may give you some feedback as it relates to their particular experience as a prospect.
Exactly. And we also ask questions about their current experience, right? So, how likely are you to renew your lease? If your management company asked you to write a review, would you do so? Things like that. So, it's really neat to get those two sort of POVs in the data. And it's interesting that there's so much in line. There when we look at
Yeah.
there's really not a big difference between what someone who is currently living an experience has to say versus someone who may be in the process of looking for a new experience.
Now, do you think the reason for that is because there is so much information online from kind of third party perspectives in review sites? So a person who has not lived in the community can have a pretty good idea of what it'd be like to live there, and so their answers are sort of bent in that direction. Is that the
I like
right way to
that.
think
Yeah,
about
I think that's a safe assessment because we do ask, did you do any research before even contacting the
it?
community? And that question has grown so much over the years, the number of people who said yes. I think renters now, they know that their time's precious. They know that they don't want to be jumping in the car on a Saturday and going and
That's right.
looking at six different communities. So yeah, I think that's a really fair assessment.
Okay, so you pull all this data in from these different sources, various sources, and then I'm going off of the table of contents here. You put it into different buckets, let's call them. You and I are going to unpack the 7 buckets that you've put this data into over the course of however long that takes. And but so I want to start with search. Search is number one in the table of contents. Any unique or interesting findings as it relates to search out of this most recent data?
So I think the top three or the big three are still the big three, right? Like I look at the ILS, I look at the community or company's website, and I look at ratings and reviews.
Mhm.
That really hasn't shifted. Ratings and reviews, though, popped into the top three. I want to say 2015 is when it became a top three source. So again, we're what you tend to feel or assume is that renters are going to do that generic Google search, right? They're going to do a
Yeah.
generic Google search, but then where they branch off from there, I think really depends on the amount of information they're able to find at their very first stop. So whatever that first stop is, right? And it's going to be
Yeah,
different for a lot of
that's right.
people. For some people, they will go to an ILS, collect whatever it is that they can. It's like a one-stop shop in a lot of ways. There are some that will, go to a company or community's website because again, if it's regional, and there are multiple communities within that portfolio, it's a one-stop shop kind of for them. For me, I am hands down first stop going to the reviews. That's just the way my shopper mind works.
Sure.
Because too, being in this world, and being from marketing, my background is in marketing. I know what marketing messages are like. I know, that
Sure.
they're going to put sort of the best foot forward, the best photos, the best image, it's going to be the best that they can represent. So for
Sure.
me, I find more value in hearing from the everyday person. But again, every renter's different, but we are seeing the big three being the big three, not really changing a whole lot. Um, but the main thing that I thought was really interesting is when you look at the age breakdown. So when we break down the results by age, it's very different. You can really see where these generations have their sort of first stop.
Uh-huh.
Because naturally, when you're taking a survey, you're going to choose that option, right? You're going
Oh,
to
sure.
choose that. So it's interesting to see based on generations who goes to Google first, or who goes to an ILS first, who goes to a community website, who goes to an online review. So when you look at the data, sort of the table in general, maybe it doesn't tell you a whole lot, but that's where those breakdowns, the breakdown tables that we have, can be really insightful.
And just if you could unpack, like, so let's say Gen Z versus someone in my demographic, I'm an X or wannabe Zer or something like that. What are the preferences in those different demographics?
Yeah, what's really interesting is that millennials tend to go to an ILS first.
Okay.
You have the older generations. Hello, those of us. Most of us, in general, tend to go to community websites, like go to a company or a community's website. We're not necessarily going to that one stop, kind of shop. And then Gen X is a really interesting one. They're kind of evenly split. They're doing more of a like a balance when they're looking at, their results are pretty even between ILSs and online reviews.
Got
So,
it.
that group is just, we could talk all day, but I digress. I digress on that one. But yes, I think the data tables that are in the back of the study probably hold a lot of value and insight, because we do break them down by rent, by age, by region, and by planned rental length. So how long do these renters plan to be renters?
Got it. Before we move on to reputation, which is number two in the table of contents, I thought it was interesting on the first table that you come across, which is like 3 or 4 pages in, the use of chatbots fell really low, right? And I don't know why, but I just automatically assumed that that would be a high ranking thing, but it doesn't seem to be a high ranking thing, at least as it relates to search. Did you find that
Yeah.
interesting?
I think the reason is because, and this doesn't really have a lot to do with multifamily, it's more so consumer behavior. As
Okay.
consumers, we haven't really found value on other sites with that type of a tool. They
Uh-huh.
haven't really been helpful. They're kind of, copy paste templated kind of answers.
Sure.
I remember I was testing one and I put in, I'm interested in a one bedroom and I'd like to know your pet policy. The
Uh-huh.
response I got back was, it sounds like you want to apply for an apartment. Please click here. So I think,
No?
I think for our industry, yes, there's an opportunity to improve, right, on that
Sure.
tool. But I think in general, consumers, we don't have a lot of faith in it. It just doesn't work for us in general. So it's not really important, when you translate that to a search.
I think that's fair. My own personal experiences, I get very frustrated by that, and I want to go old school and just to talk to somebody on the phone who can answer my questions and respond to me real time. So,
Yeah, yeah. And
um,
and renting is always going to be very personal, right? There's all I mean, it's they're self-service things that work for
sure.
renters, but I think there's still value in that human connection and being able to talk to someone. I'm good with chatting with someone online as long as I know it's an actual person I'm
Right.
chatting with, right? So yeah, I if technology advances to where I'm not being asked things that I don't, that I'm not
Right.
interested in, or, it sounds like you want to pay your bill. It's like, no, I just wanted to know when my due date was. So that kind of stuff. I think if technology advances, you'll start to see more renters, wanting that same kind of service when they're looking for a home.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Well, so let's shift gears and talk about reputation. What did
My
you find
world.
interesting in the reputation world?
I think the big thing, and this is one interesting thing about the survey this year, we removed a lot of kind of rote questions. Do you want electric car charging stations? Are you interested in a swimming pool? We removed a lot of those questions because other studies already had them. And so we were almost just kind of repeating data or providing repetitive data that didn't really help when you already have a source to go to. So we
Sure.
scrapped about 50% of our question list from 2019 or 2021 and added a bunch of new ones. So the reputation section is a lot more robust because what we were finding over the years, and as a lot of this came because of the pandemic,
Sure.
is that renters really had to rely on the opinion of others. They really became more engrossed in online reviews, paid more attention to online reviews. And so we asked a lot of new questions this year, and most of them fell in that reputation category.
Got it. So let's say you changed the methodology a little bit, as at least as it relates to the questioning. When you got the data back, were there any sort of aha or whoa, didn't see that coming kind of moments?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and there's a whole page in the report dedicated to this, is just a table, and it asks renters to tell us which elements of an online review they find most helpful. So we gave them 10 different elements and had them just pick five out of the 10 that they found were most helpful. That the data there really surprised us. The least helpful element is the star rating. And for our
Okay.
industry, I think it was like 24% pick star rating. For our industry, that's all we really care about, right?
Yeah.
5-star reviews, got to get
Right.
5-star reviews. And renters are like, yeah, that's really nice. Pat on the back, feather in your cap, but doesn't really, mean a whole lot to me. So the most important, over 80% said the most important were the words in the review itself, the actual content of the review. And that was, it wasn't surprising, but it was really affirming to see. It was like, okay, great. We know that renters are paying attention to things beyond a star rating. So that was really eye opening. We also asked a new question, and it was an open text box. We asked renters to give us the minimum star rating that they do require of an apartment community that they're considering. They could
Okay.
put 1 star, 1.2, 3.8. We didn't care. We
Sure.
took all of that raw data and we averaged it out. The overall average, 3.82. So when you're
Interesting.
thinking about our industry and our initiatives being centered around 5-star reviews, yet you have renters who are comfortable with a less than perfect reputation. They just want an honest reputation, right? They want to know the good, the bad, everything in between. That was another aha moment. And I think the last one that really surprised me, we asked if renters actively filter for negative reviews during their search, meaning that's the main thing they want to see. They want to see the negative reviews. 70% said yes. I actively filter for negative reviews during my search.
And is the filter? I'm interested if that, going to your point about star rating not being as important versus a narrative in the review. I guess you have to filter by stars first. I'm just trying to think of like
Hmm.
Amazon or other. So you do filter by stars, but then the renter really cares about the narrative as it relates to that star rating. That's what they really
Absolutely.
want.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's such a you put it together perfectly. If you go to Google, you can sort the reviews by highest rated or lowest rated. So,
Right.
behavior, according to the data, says that they're sorting by the lowest rating. Like they want to know like what are
Yeah.
those pain points? What are those problem points? Because for some people, what's a problem for one is not a problem for the next person.
Sure.
Maybe
That's right.
someone's like parking sucks and I don't have a
Yeah.
car,
Right.
So
Right.
so if parking's not that big a deal to me, or there's loud music on the weekends, but maybe I work on weekends, and I think the things that the majority would find problematic, maintenance, maybe even neighbors in a way, maybe customer service type of issues. I think that kind of those general drawbacks would be impactful, but you have to look at, those very nuanced negative aspects may not apply to the entire crowd.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, punchline here before we move on to social is stars are still important as it relates to trying to get people to give you reviews, but that narrative, it sounds like, is very, very important, which makes me believe that responding to those reviews is likely also important because if they're reading the narrative of the consumer, they're going to probably read the narrative of the person responding to that particular review. So, all of that is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about responses, there's a section in the report that talks about how renters believe how you respond online is how you treat residents in real life. And
Oh,
so if, we even ask like, how do you feel if they use templates, or how do you feel if they use, AI generated responses? We're starting to see, AI popping up a lot in our space. And so we asked a lot of questions, around that. And renters really, they're like, if you're giving me a template, if you're, copy paste, you're kind of treating me among the masses. I'm not special. I'm not, your residents are not special. If you are using shortcuts, and that's how they see, those tools that we feel are time savers, they see them as shortcuts. And so it's like, you're going to shortcut my service request. You're not, so it's pretty
that's right.
interesting. And again, this is just this round. It might change the more that, uh, consumers in general are exposed to AI, and the more that they see the benefits and see that it works. But right now, where renters are, they're just not that impressed. Not yet.
Not yet. So, for those of you taking notes out there, that was a value bomb that Leah just dropped. So make sure you note that down. Um, okay, let's move on to the third topic. Just trying to do three and hold the pen at the same time. Can't do that. Three. All right, we're moving on to social. What did you find interesting in the social area of the survey?
Okay, so honestly, this was one of the sections where I had to sit with the data for a while. There wasn't anything like earth shattering. There wasn't, a big like change in the trend line. Engagement is still fairly low when it comes to social media, which I think is okay. You're not going to get 80% of your residents to follow you on social media and like everything that you do. But we did ask, for what reasons would you follow your apartment community on social media? So if you don't, like, what's happening? What can they do? How can they make things better? The number one most selected was, I would follow my community for updates and news on what's happening at my community. Like they want to use it as like, an area for information as opposed to, you know, seeing your vacant apartments or seeing, that you have a virtual tour. So we look at social media, and the advice that we're giving to our clients is, does your content inform and entertain? That's what you should be looking, to add to your social media. Does it inform? Does it entertain? And does it support the brand, your brand? So, whatever it is that you say your company is about, or whatever it is you say your community is about, you know, does your social content support what you say you are? And I think, we're starting to see a lot better posts and content being put out, which I think is great. But it's, you still got the vacant apartments and the move-in specials and, that kind of stuff. It's those that are doing social really well are focusing on the life at the community, the experience of being a resident. So there's some great examples out there, but we're not yet there.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I recently, I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but two things come to mind as it relates to sharing things on your social channels. You should definitely not share a picture of the bathroom with the toilet seat, and that's the only thing that's really in the shot. And you should be careful. I know we all uh, love adding music because it creates emotion, right?
Mm.
And into our post, but I saw a post recently that had a song that was just full of curse words, like right out of the box. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if that would really translate well to maybe for some, but it's like, you just got to be careful about the music that you choose. Go with the clean versions. That's one guy's opinion. Maybe it's not the broader audience's opinion, but I think you got to be careful about the way you post on social. So you're saying
Yeah,
that, to your point, you need to be in alignment with the reality of the community.
absolutely. Yeah, inform, entertain, and support your brand. I think that's an easy, easy 3 steps to follow.
I love that.
We'll get back to that in 1 second. I just want to remind everybody that this episode is brought to you by AppWork. Best known for exceptional maintenance, workflow management, AppWork offers so much more. It can optimize operations with its advanced business intelligence that turns data into strategy. Who knew? Data into strategy. That's awesome. Simplify your operations with AppWorks intuitive platform. Service team members love this. They love the gamification of maintenance workflows and leaderboards, making everyday tasks a competition for number one. Who doesn't love a little competition? Well, from project management to team communication, AppWork has you covered. Visit appworkco.com. That's appworkco.com today.
Thank you for sharing that. We're going to
Yeah.
move on to number 4, which is perception. So unpack perception for us and any of the cool things that you found in that area.
So this is a new section as well. There were a couple of whole questions that carried over from prior studies, asking, do you consider the company's brand when choosing an apartment home? We haven't really seen a whole lot of movement there. It's always been in the 20s. I think it was like 24% this last round, which makes sense. I mean, there's not a big like national awareness of like, I can live at all these there's all these different communities within this portfolio. Renters stick to kind of are local, right? They're
Yeah.
like in their little bubble. But we did ask new questions about ESG initiatives.
Okay.
How do renters feel about that? And we actually borrowed that question set from a Deloitte study where they asked, would how does ESG make you feel about company brands? Would you, be more loyal, if you thought that these companies were, really serious about their ESG initiatives? And one of the questions that we asked, it was a level of agreement statement. So do you agree with the statement? I refuse to do business with any company that treats the environment, its employees, and I believe in poorly. I wouldn't do business with those companies. Over 70% said yes. So they are really looking at from a perception standpoint, what does your company stand for? Right? It's not just sort of the lip service or, the pride flag during Pride Month or, a statement here and there. It's like, is this ingrained in your company culture? And is this demonstrated throughout every level of your organization? I think a lot of consumers, we see companies that sort of jump on a certain bandwagon as
Sure.
convenient, right? And you almost
Sure.
forget about it, or they almost forget about it. And then there are some companies that just embrace it wholeheartedly. We're going for it. And
Yeah.
so I think that renters are paying attention. And what really spurred this set of questions on was the emergence of Gen Z and what we've learned about Gen Z. And knowing that this is the second round of the study where we have a completely segmented Generation Z group of
Yeah.
respondents. Because in prior years, they were sort of mixed in. We had millennials and Gen Z, we had millennials and Gen X, sort of a mishmash. But this was the second time of the study where they were totally Gen Z answers. No, mixing of the generations in there. So we could really tell year over year or study over study trends, and they're holding really strong. This generation is really waking up society in general, and it's causing a ripple effect. You start to see more boomers paying attention, more Gen X paying attention, right? To social causes and things like that. So I love this section, and I have to give credit to our director of client performance, Carla Alicea. She's like, I think we need to ask these questions. I think we need to throw this in here. Some other questions that we also asked were around fee transparency. And, what do you feel like companies could do a much better job with? And, overwhelmingly, the renters responded, I think they need to be more transparent about their pricing and about the fees that they're charging. Um, the application process, I think they need to be more transparent about that. So it's really interesting. Again, few years ago, we never talked about fee transparency. You didn't even
So,
hear the term junk fees, in our industry. Now it's become a political hot button, and so it's really starting to resonate with renters that this is something they should pay attention to. And so with that, I think it's something we should pay attention to as an industry.
you're so right, and it's interesting. If I think over the arc of my career, it's and I've been in operations my entire career. And so I think from an operator's perspective, adding fees is just a way to generate additional revenues. And you kind of keep the consumer in mind, and they do balk at it from time to time, but we get over it and we just kind of keep increasing and accelerating the pace of fees. And we dream up these just new ways of putting fees into the system. But at some point, people get fatigued by
Hmm.
that. And I think we've reached that moment where fatigue is turning into unrest, and we really do need to rethink the way that we actually administer fees. And some of them are legit, and some of them are maybe a stretch,
Well,
So
I think too, we need to consider the impact that it makes on our employees as well.
sure, true.
One of the most difficult things for me when I worked on site was being able to give a
That's right.
reasonable reason
That's right.
why a cat owner had to pay pet rent. Because the pet rent, our go-to answer was, it's for the doggy stations, it's for, pickup and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, this person has a cat, why do they have to pay a pet rent? And then it's like, well, damage to your apartment, but I'm paying a pet deposit and you're making me pay a pet fee. And so it was so difficult. And I used to get anxious, when someone said that they had a
Sure.
cat, because I didn't really know the best way to explain that. And you do get some where it's like, well, that's just, it's a fee that we have, the admin fee. It's a fee that we have. So I think we could support our on-site teams a lot better with those two. If they're in place and it is what it is, let's make it easier for them. to explain it, to someone who's considering our communities.
I agree. I think to use your word whisper, sometimes I call it a tell, but wi- your whisper or your tell is if you as a consumer go out into the marketplace and you you purchase something, or you go online and you purchase something, the telephone bill is the one that drives me crazy. Right? I get my cell phone bill and there's like all these surcharges, and a hotel bill is another one. You get all these ancillary fees, and it drives me crazy. So I don't stop to go, you know what, we kind of do that in the apartment industry. You should. It makes me angry, and this other thing, it probably, if I were on the other side of this equation, would make me angry as an apartment renter. So
Yep,
it's
absolutely.
definitely something to pay attention to. Okay, let's shift gears and go to technology. This is likely my favorite topic in the world, but I would love to hear what you learned out of this survey as it relates to technology.
I learned that we make a lot of assumptions as to what we feel like renters need and what they want. What renters are kind of telling us is that if it doesn't make my life easier, if it doesn't make the
Mhm.
process simpler, if it doesn't kind of alleviate some of those roadblocks and pain points, why is it there? It's to have it just to have it isn't really making a renter say, that's the place I want to live. And so, again, we may not see the same results when we ask these questions in 2 more years, but right now, and based on historical data, our renters just don't feel as though a lot of what we're putting our resources behind and energy behind, um, it trumps great maintenance, or trumps fee transparency. We still ask the question, two different options: do you want to pay rent online without a fee, or pay rent online with a fee? I mean, why are we still asking that question? We're asking those questions because there are still those out there that are charging the fees, and so it's like, again, renters are like, just make life less difficult. There's already enough outside of these four walls, right? There's already enough that I'm dealing with. So um, I don't know, again, if we're going to get to the point where renters are like, I'm demanding all of this technology. Right now,
Yeah.
they're like, if you're going to do it, just make sure it makes my life easy. It works, it's reliable, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I don't want to use an overused word, but I'm going to. The word friction comes to mind, and when you introduce friction into somebody's experience, a perfect example of that is if I work with a chatbot trying to solve my issue, and I don't get there, and all of a sudden I'm online with a real life human, and I have to repeat everything that I just put into the chat, right? I've created friction because now I'm frustrated that I have to repeat myself, right? So it is a real it's a real issue with our processes and all of our systems. I think there are friction that's being built in, and those providers out there in the marketplace who are working on a frictionless type environment, to me, have a real leg to stand on from
Yeah,
that point that you shared.
they get it right. Anyone who gets it right and gets it right first, they're going to be in a great spot to be in, because, again, this is historical data where renters are like, I'm not there yet. It's not important to me yet because you guys aren't there yet. You know, but once they live in a community that has it right, it's frictionless, it's easy, that's going to be their new standard.
That's right. That's right. Is it also fair to say, I don't know if the data represents this, but if let's just speak for you and me, our experience out in the world, away from the apartment industry, when we interact and engage with a business out in a marketplace or online, and that particular experience is very frictionless. Let's use Amazon as an example. I can go to Amazon, I can search, find my product, I click a button, and it shows up on my doorstep the following day. Not a lot of friction, but now that becomes my right. That becomes my benchmark for how business should work in the apartment industry. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say?
I think so. I agree. And
Yeah.
going back to the fact that we've had 2 years or two rounds now with Gen Z, What's interesting about Gen Z is that by nature they're very entrepreneurial. A lot of them have already had their own businesses, have made their own money, have dealt with customers before, and so they understand a certain level of customer service is needed. And so you have that mindset already where if I'm doing this for my customers, I expect at a minimum for anybody that I work with or deal with to provide the same level of customer service. We didn't have an overwhelming number of Gen Zs that participated in the study, but I think from a data standpoint, they were very strong in the selections that they made. They were very resolute. Like they picked a five, like it's a
Yeah,
5 out of 5. And when you have those generations that are giving the fours and the fives, when everyone else is just sort of like, mixing it up, you have a very definitive statement that's coming out. And so I do believe that when we're talking about frictionless and setting the bar, for a lot of people, they've set the bar not just as a consumer, but as a provider as well.
that's right. That's right. You know what's so exciting in the statement that you just made is the cohort that is, sort of the primary renter that people want to go after, that 18 to, let's call it 18 to 34 or 18 to 28 kind of cohort, which let's say that's made up of Gen Z. That same generation, they are creating their own businesses, sometimes as side hustles, while they are working in an apartment community as a leasing agent or so on, whatever positions we have. The point I'm getting to is Gen Z is starting to serve Gen Z. And the
Mm-hmm.
big punchline out of that is that our industry is going to get better for all the reasons that you just cited, because this generation that's working in our business has been on the other side of this equation, and they're not going to settle. They're not going to settle. They're going to push this industry into the way consumers behave out in the larger marketplace.
Yeah. And what's happening with Gen Z is either we're all jumping on that bandwagon, we're
Right.
learning, we're growing, we're adopting better technology, or we're going to be aged out. I hate to say
That's
it,
so
we're
true.
going to,
It's true.
you get exhausted. Like, I just can't do this anymore. We'll let the young people have it. I don't want to be on that side of the coin. I want to be on the bandwagon that's learning and growing. And I think too, that's why we are seeing a lot of technology based type of topics in our industry. AI. We're seeing a lot of centralization, never been a thing before, right?
Right.
So automation. We're seeing a lot of that because you have these, this stronger force that's kind of pushing us in that direction.
It's a really good way to put that. That's exactly what's happening. There's momentum now. That force is behind. It's going to push,
Hmm.
and we're all going to get better because of it. Okay, let's move to chapter 6, experience.
Ooh.
What did you learn in the area of experience?
So the big thing, I think, and this is something that we talk about all the time in our industry, is trying to put the tail on the donkey when it comes to sense of community. Like, what is sense of community? Back in my
Yeah,
day, it was Sunday brunch, wine tastings, the holiday party, the pool parties. It was events. It was finding opportunities for residents to connect with each other. That was
right.
like what we thought sense of community was. Where renters are right now, renters have kind of changed that sense of community to sense of belonging. Do I feel like I belong here? Right? Does
Yes,
this
exactly.
community offer the type of experience that matters to me? Which means that even from the first, slab of concrete to cutting the ribbon, has this community been designed in a way that offers a sense of belonging to multiple residents? It's,
Yes,
it's not just let's just have a fitness center because we're supposed to have a fitness center, or let's make sure that we have the bells and whistles inside of the apartment. That's it's great. It's a, feature, right? But the actual experience has become way more important for renters. And an experience is not just you have these parties or these food trucks. The experience is the treatment from the management team, how quickly my, service requests are getting done. I used to ask people, and I got this from Jen Picotti, who I love. I used to ask people at a conference, how many of you have plans to hang out with your neighbors this weekend? Didn't get a whole lot of hands raising, right? It's like, if you guys aren't hanging out with your neighbors, what makes you think your renters want to do that as well? In terms of neighbor to neighbor relationship, I just want you to follow the rules. I want you to be a good neighbor, right? If we see each other in passing, say hello, say good morning. But I don't think, a lot needs to be done in terms of like getting me to like you. Now, that's different than having an event. An event is a reason for me to leave my apartment. It's not a reason for me to meet my neighbor. I don't care who my neighbor is, right? That's how renters are. They're not that, serious about the neighbor. But you still need to have the events because they're expected. It's an expectation. But really, what we saw in the study is we asked about the importance of sense of community, and then for residents to rate the level of sense of community at their current experience. And that gap is so wide. It's hugely important, right? But they're not getting it. So when you have that variance, that room that's in the middle, that's what we call ambivalence. That's where renters are like, I need it, but I don't necessarily have it. I wonder if this next community closes the gap a little bit better, right? So yeah, that I think when we look at experience, that for me was some of the biggest takeaways that I had. Just the expectation, the actual experience, and where that divide is happening.
It's interesting. It brings to mind. I know you work with Jessica Pope. She wrote an
Mm-hmm.
article. I think she wrote an article that was based on this data recently. Can't remember where it was published, but Jessica and I used to work together in a prior life. Um, but I read the article, and what it brought to mind for me was that there is a cohort, and I'll share my own personal, but like, I know we talked about this at the very beginning in a different context. I'm a super shy person. I'm very introverted. I read a lot of books. When I come home at night, I don't see anyone. I've spent all of my energy throughout the day. So when I get home, I want sanctuary, right? I want quiet. I want to just whatever curl up in fetal position and get ready for the next day. And I think a lot of times there's this silent sort of piece of the population, let's call them the quiet part of the generation or the population rather, that doesn't really want all that stuff that apartment developers and even apartment operators want to program, right? It's my home is my sanctuary. I
Mm-hmm.
just want it to be quiet. And I don't want to be invited to stuff. And I get your point. Like we should do that because it is expected. And there's a whole other part of the population that loves that stuff. But it's how you got to figure out how to sort of create both in that broader thing called experience for people.
Yeah, and it means something different to everybody, right? It's sense of
That's right.
belonging. Do I feel like I
That's right.
belong here? That means if I'm an events person, they do great events. If I want
Exactly.
to be at home and be quiet, it is my sanctuary here. If I want
Yes.
great service, that's important to me. I'm getting great service. So, yeah, I'm with you. If I lived in an apartment community, aside from working at one, I would never go to an event. I never go to, the fitness center. I'm a homebody. I
Yeah.
you know I so yes, but then my sister, very
Yeah.
gregarious. She would be the hostess with the mostest. She'd be throwing every party and attending everything and probably dragging me with her. So yeah, it means something different to everyone. And I think we do need to take that into consideration, even when we're looking at constructing a community, new
Yes.
builds. We really need to think about that.
I 100% agree. Yeah, and even in the exterior spaces of that design, like, are there places where you can create yoga moments or meditation moments or any of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff? So, okay, we've come up to the seventh section, which is predictions. I
I hope
love
people
this.
are still hanging in there.
They're here, or we've organized the chapters and people have, like, skip forward to the ones they think are interesting. They're hanging on. I know they are. In my heart of hearts, they're hanging on. Predictions. Uh, this is where you kind of, like, I guess you got some data, and based on that data, you're making predictions, or are these predictions that the data that you collected are kind of the consumer is making the prediction? Can you kind of
Yeah,
tell
this is
us
data
about that?
that I actually had a session at Apartmentalize last year, and it was called Bold Predictions for 2025 and the
Oh,
Rise
okay.
of the Homebody. That was the name of the session. And
I
the
love that.
the reason that it even came about was looking at data from a variety of different sources, the U.S. Census Bureau, a bunch of different independent studies, and it was how the pandemic really created a new population of homebodies.
Mm,
People that, because we had no choice, we were at home, and even the most outgoing, gregarious person, i.e., my sister, still has a piece of her that enjoys being at home that she never realized before. And so, if you have more people now who are spending more time at home, what does home need to look like? What should that look like for people? And so, with the data, again, a bunch of different sources came up with 5 sort of psychographic segments of people. Like, who are
okay.
these people? They are hyper personalized, they are hyper tribalized, they expect, the care of one. And so, they are conscientious consumers. Again, we're seeing more of Gen Z really paying attention to ESG initiatives, which made us in general wake up and pay attention. I think society made us wake up, right, over the
Sure.
last,
Oh, sure.
few years. So yeah, so that session had 5 predictions, and this was before we did the study. So when the study came out, I went back and I looked, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is still pretty much on track. Like, okay, we're doing all right. Let's throw this in the study, because now we actually had, before it was really reading the tea leaves. Like, I'm not gonna lie, that's what it was. In for
Sure.
Apartmentalize, it was like, here's what I'm feeling. But to have the data support that, it's like, here's what we know. We now have data that is like, this is where renters are headed. These are the things that we need to kind of strategize now. um, the reason we picked 2025 is that Zillow released a study that said by the year 2025, um, renters, millennials, will regain market share in terms of home ownership. So if 2025 is going to be sort of like the tipping point for young people who have gotten themselves, further away from being in debt, have, saved up their money because they've been living with roommates or living with parents or whatever, and credit's looking good, and now they're in a position to buy a home. What does our industry need to do to make sure that, for those that have the option, they are kind of torn. I kind of want
Yeah.
to buy, but I might stay. I'm not sure. What does those experiences need to look like for them to keep them as renters, or to make them hold off a little bit longer on buying a home? So yeah, that's where those predictions came from. And again, it was tea leaves in June, complete tea leaves. I'm not gonna lie. It was like my Rain Man moment. And then to have the data, back it up, it was like, okay, yes, we're going to go with this.
Excellent, excellent. Well, so we've run through the chapters. There is an appendice, if that's how
Mm-hmm.
you say that. But I'm going to leave that for, we're going to link this up in the show notes where people can get this survey along with some other mentions. We'll put those in the show notes as well. But I do want to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can find out more about Satisfacts, apartment ratings, Lia Nichole Smith, or your dog. Is your dog Ziggy?
Yeah. Yeah, you remembered. ZZ is he's actually right over here sleeping. Oh, you remembered that.
Well, I have to out myself. So I shot a couple text messages out letting people know that I was going to interview you today. And I asked him for some information. And so Jessica Pope told me that's your dog's name. So we worked
Oh,
that
yeah.
in.
Well, he's been very quiet today. He's a puppy, and so he's been just laying over here quiet right now, which is great. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, those where we can learn more.
apartment ratings and Satisfacts. Obviously, you can go to our websites. I would recommend for the industry going straight to Satisfacts. It's more of our industry facing site. It has all the information, our webinars, the studies that we do. You can obviously link from there to apartment ratings. Apartment ratings is the consumer facing, part of what we do. And for me, I'm on probably LinkedIn more than anything. Lia Nichole has an H in it, Nichole. Don't know why, but it does. And so, yeah, that's pretty much where you can find me. And I think I'm gonna be at conferences all over the place starting in the next couple of weeks. I have Seattle, the VAMA conference, AIM, Apartmentalize. So yeah, we're gonna be pretty busy around here.
I love it. I love it. Well, before we sign off, Lia, I want to acknowledge you as an amazing human. And my
Oh,
basis for that is in part this time that I've spent with you, but also just the testament of all the people in this industry. When I reach out and I can shoot text messages or emails around, the people who speak about you, who you are as a person, your character, it's just so amazing, the feedback that I get as it relates to you. So I want to acknowledge you and in what you're doing to contribute to the industry, but who you are as a person as well.
thank you. Tell them all their checks are coming.
I love it. I love it. I'll shoot the messages out now. All right. Well, I appreciate you investing some time with me today. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time on Collective Conversations. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And I want to give one more hat tip to AppWork for sponsoring today's episode. Imagine carrying a digital make-ready board in your pocket with work order tracking and maintenance technician leaderboards designed to gamify the process and bring out your team's competitive best. As a reminder, if that sounds interesting, you can go to appworkco.com. That's appworkco.com today to learn more.